Because when a vessel is tied directly or indirectly to high-profile political figures and financial investigations, it stops being about luxury and becomes about power, pressure, and global tracking systems most viewers never think about. And if you skip understanding how these maritime seizures actually unfold, you miss the real story. How assets move, how authorities act, and how entire ownership networks get exposed in real time. Today, I'm breaking down EP56 of SY News covering the so-called Putin-Linked Superyacht situation in Spain. Not just what happened, but the exact sequence of how these cases escalate, step by step, so you understand what actually gets checked, seized, and investigated before most of the public even realizes it's happening. Stick with this, because by the end, you'll understand how these maritime arrests really work, and how professionals read the signals before the headlines even drop. We move in phases. Follow them in order. Plaf 1. Initial signal detection and suspicion building. Identify the trigger that starts the investigation. First, you need to understand this. No superyacht is arrested randomly. There is always a trigger. It can be sanctions lists, ownership leaks, port entry logs, or flagged financial transfers. Why it matters is simple. Without a trigger, nothing moves. Authorities don't act on luxury. They act on data. What can go wrong if you skip this understanding? You'll assume these events are sudden, when in reality they are the final step of weeks or months of monitoring. Pro tip: most high-value yacht investigations begin not at sea, but in financial compliance databases. Long before the vessel changes location, track the ownership structure. Not the Yacht cases involving figures like Vladimir Putin. The focus is rarely direct ownership. It's layered through trusts, shell companies, and offshore registration. Why it matters is simple. The yacht is just the visible asset. The real target is the ownership chain. What can go wrong if skipped? You misinterpret enforcement actions as political theater instead of structured asset tracing, insider detail. Many yachts appear owned by leasing firms in jurisdictions that specialize in privacy. Not transparent. Bien 2. Port entry and operational monitoring. Observe the port choice and timing when a yacht enters a port like Spain. It's not just docking. It's entering a jurisdiction with full inspection rights. Why it matters. Port entry activates customs visibility, inspection authority, and sometimes immediate freezing powers. What can go wrong if skipped? You miss the moment when a vessel transitions from private movement to regulated asset. Pro tip: authorities often wait for port entry because open sea enforcement is far more complex legally. Monitor the first compliance checks once docked. Documents get reviewed. Registration, insurance, crew contracts, and ownership declarations. Why it matters. Discrepancies here are the first legal justification for detention. What can go wrong if skipped? You assume seizure happens due to politics, not paperwork inconsistencies. Little-known fact: even minor mismatches between declared and actual beneficial ownership can trigger full detention orders in EU ports. Spot 3. Escalation into detention. Understand the legal threshold for arrest. A yacht isn't arrested in a criminal sense. It is detained under maritime or financial enforcement law. Why it matters. This distinction explains why the process is administrative, not dramatic. What can go wrong if skipped? You misunderstand enforcement as immediate punishment instead of procedural action. Insider tip: in most cases, crews are not arrested. The vessel itself becomes the legal object of restriction. Follow the chain of authority escalation. Port authorities escalate to national regulators, then to international sanction compliance units if flagged. Why it matters. Each layer adds legal weight and prevents unilateral reversal. What can go wrong if skipped? You think one authority made the decision. when in reality it's multi-layered coordination, pro-insight. These escalations often involve cross-checking EU sanctions databases in real time. Bot 4. Asset containment and control. Watch how access is restricted immediately once detained. Physical access is controlled. Crew movement limits, fuel restrictions, and sometimes onboard inspections. Why it matters. Containment prevents asset movement or concealment of evidence. What can go wrong if skipped? You assume the yacht remains operational. It doesn't. It enters controlled status instantly. Insider detail. Even maintenance schedules are frozen unless explicitly approved. Track financial freeze actions separately from physical detention banks, and insurers are often notified independently of port authorities. Why it matters. Without insurance or operational funding, the yacht cannot legally operate even if released. What can go wrong if skipped? You think release is simply a port decision. It's actually financial system dependent. FOS 5. Investigation expansion and media exposure. Watch how media confirmation lags behind enforcement. By the time news breaks, the yacht is already detained and documented. Why it matters. Public reporting is always delayed compared to enforcement timelines. What can go wrong if skipped? You treat news as the start of the event instead of the aftermath. Pro tip. In cases tied to high-profile political figures like Vladimir Putin, confirmation cycles are even slower due to diplomatic sensitivity. Track secondary investigations triggered by the seizure once detained. Authorities often expand investigations into shipping networks, insurance providers, and intermediary companies. Why it matters. One yacht can expose entire asset ecosystems. What can go wrong if skipped? You see it as a single asset case instead of a network disruption event. Phase 6. Outcomes and resolution pathways. Understand the three possible outcomes. The yacht is either released, reflagged under new compliance, or held long-term under legal dispute. Why it matters. Each outcome signals different levels of legal certainty. What can go wrong if skipped? You assume all seizures end in confiscation, which is rarely true. Insider fact. Many detained yachts remain in legal limbo for years, accumulating massive maintenance costs, reputational and financial fallout even without permanent seizure. The reputational damage affects ownership structures, insurance costs, and port access globally. Why it matters. The real consequence is long-term operational restriction, not just detention. What can go wrong if skipped? You underestimate the lasting impact beyond the headline. Traps to avoid. First, don't assume arrested yacht means criminal arrest. It is legal detention under maritime and financial compliance systems. Second, don't focus only on the vessel. The real investigation target is always ownership structure and financial routing. Third, don't think the story starts at the port. It usually starts weeks earlier in sanctions lists and compliance databases. And finally, don't treat these cases as isolated events. They are part of larger enforcement systems tracking global asset movement. Closing now, I want to hear from you. Did you ever think superyacht seizures were this structured, or did you assume they were instant political decisions?